Hi, this is Andri Bester, and you're joining me on This Is What We Were Told. On this channel, I'm talking about issues of faith that seriously challenged my belief in the integrity of the Bible. In 2020, I published a book on my spiritual journey called This Is What We Were Told. The aim with my book was to challenge people to look beyond the limitations of religious belief and to take in the bigger picture of the wonder of life. On this channel, I want to give viewers a taste of the topics I cover in my book. On this channel and through my book, I want to awaken people to the wonders of life playing out right around them, just beyond the boundaries of faith. So, please stick around and maybe you find something useful here. Today I'd like to talk about how I think belief became embedded in society and why people are convinced that their faith are unshakable and justified. This is going to be quite a bit of information, so I'd rather split this talk into two parts. For now, let's start off by looking firstly at how belief is born and imprinted onto us. We're going to take this information and cross-check it against what the Bible tells us about the establishment of faith. Specifically, faith in the God of the Bible. And then, secondly, we'll look at how geography and culture shaped the development of belief. In the subsequent talk, I will then conclude by looking at how writing and reading shaped the development of religious faith and how confirmation bias tricks us into trusting religious thinking. It was only when I started questioning the pillars of my own religious beliefs that it occurred to me that other people have different beliefs because they probably had valid reasons for having those beliefs. I believed because I grew up in a home where the Christian belief system was cemented into my day-to-day existence and way of life. These beliefs were backed by a holy book, the Bible, and by actual events in my own life that supported and validated the things in which I believed. But in exactly the same way, people from other parts and cultures have different belief systems. They grew up in homes where those beliefs were cemented into their day-to-day existence and way of life. Many of them also have holy books that back their belief systems. Their beliefs are further supported by actual life events that confirm and validate in their own minds the things which they believe. We who subscribe to a particular religion may perhaps think that those other beliefs are baseless, but the fact remains that the people who subscribe to those beliefs are genuinely convinced of the integrity of their own religious convictions. But there's more. In the same way that Christians think their belief system is the only truth, so do non-Christians sincerely believe that Christianity is completely without merit. And it's not because they are completely unfamiliar with Christianity. Christianity is quite accessible throughout the developing and developed world. So, why do we believe differently? Why are these differences often so deep-seated and fundamental? Let's consider the story of Noah and the Great Flood. Let's accept for a moment that this story, as conveyed in the Bible in the book of Genesis, is factually true. This story actually sets the starting point for a single religion all over the globe. Let me explain. When Noah stepped off the ark at the end of the great flood, the only humans remaining alive on earth were Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. 8 people on the entire globe. According to the Bible, they were the only people who were righteous enough to be spared the flood. Supposedly, they were the only people who were true believers in the God of the Bible. So, when Noah stepped off the ark, the only religion in existence on earth at that time, according to the Bible, was the belief in the God of the Bible. So, how did it come about that people subsequently started believing all sorts of other differing narratives? If all these narratives originated from the same master narrative, one would expect that they would all display some common thread throughout. But that's not what we find in reality. How did it happen that the belief in one single invisible deity became a plethora of beliefs and superstitions? I mean, before the story of the God of the Bible was written down, one can accept that word of mouth transference of the stories about this God might have led to some watering down or embellishment of the plot. However, this astonishing confusion of beliefs and religions we see today certainly could not have arisen as a result of the inefficiencies of word of mouth. Something else must have had a role to play here. What made people start believing in all sorts of different things, and how is it that they are all convinced that their beliefs can be backed by solid evidence? Well, I'm not sure I have the complete or the correct answer. But if you just apply some common sense thinking, there's a fairly plausible solution that jumps out. In my previous talk, I already spoke about how primitive humankind only had belief, religion, and ritual to make sense of the world in which they lived. Go check out episode 6 on why it is that people believe at all. Primitive humankind determined the events that played out around them as acts of one or more gods. In their naivety, they developed beliefs and rituals around what they perceived to be the activities of gods in order to keep those gods appeased. If the gods are appeased, everybody can live in peace and security. However, I do not think that this simple summary gives the entire picture. I think that the development of the multitude of different beliefs can also be ascribed to a combination of culture, geographical location, and language. In modern times, where global travel, electronic media, and the internet have made it possible for people to have exposure to the ideas of a wide variety of belief systems, the close ties that culture, geographical location, and language have with religious belief are perhaps less obvious. However, in days when travel was much more challenging and exposure to other cultures was largely limited to explorers and missionaries, a religious belief system would have been one of the defining characteristics of a particular civilization. You would neither have found Buddhism flourishing in the deserts of Saudi Arabia, nor Islam flourishing in the mountains of Peru. Christianity, although founded in the Hebrew, Greek, and Latin-speaking parts of the Mediterranean, gained its strongest growth in Europe, from where it was spread to the rest of the world. Islam has long been associated with Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, Hinduism is associated with India and its surrounding neighbors. In the same way, different African civilizations, South American native civilizations, and Pacific Island civilizations have had their unique religious beliefs. Probably more often than not, these religious beliefs were as old as the particular civilization itself. Each of these civilizations only had themselves to try to make sense of the world in which they lived and the events that played out around them. Each civilization had to arrive at its own conclusions based on the patterns they thought they perceived in the events playing out around them. Because of long distances and natural boundaries between different civilizations, it is only to be expected that different civilizations formed different ideas about the world in which they lived and the events that played out around them. Many of these civilizations probably did not even know of one another's existence. And even in those cases where they did know of one another's existence, the possibility of cross-cultural exchange of knowledge regarding the world would have been difficult due to remoteness from one another and impassable natural boundaries between them. And even where different civilizations did meet at common natural boundaries, it was more probable that war would ensue, simply because of language barriers, prejudice, and intolerance of one another's views. I think this provides a plausible explanation for why different belief systems developed. But the striking difference in belief systems hides an element of irony if you think about it carefully. If it really is true that God revealed himself to each of these civilizations, one cannot help but notice the obvious. God appears to have revealed himself to different civilizations in a multitude of differing and contradictory ways, identities, and forms. Would it make sense for the same supreme deity to reveal himself or herself or itself in a multitude of confusing and conflicting ways to different civilizations in hopes of uniting the entire world in faith? I don't think so. I'm convinced that specific religious beliefs are inextricably linked to specific civilizations because, in the absence of scientifically researched explanations, a belief system was all that was available to them to help them make sense of the day-to-day events they had to contend with, and that otherwise defied logical explanation. My common sense is telling me that as different civilizations contemplated their own different realities, they all arrived at differing conclusions. Those differing conclusions at which they arrived were repeatedly validated and strengthened in their own minds over long periods of time by everyday events that appeared to be confirming their conclusions. With adequate validation over prolonged periods of time, these conclusions crystallized into differing accepted norms and rituals unique to each civilization. Okay, we've looked at the development and cementing of belief and how geographical and cultural elements further shape the development of belief. Join me next time when I conclude this talk by looking at how writing and reading shaped the establishment of belief and how confirmation bias convinces us of the validity of our own beliefs. This is Andri Bester for This Is What We Were Told. If you're interested in a copy of my book, mail me at the address on the screen and I'll be in touch. Have a lovely day.